Imagine, right, waking up with just the absolute perfect plan for your day.
Oh, the ideal schedule.
Exactly. Like you have it completely mapped out in your head. 6 in the morning, you meditate. 7, you exercise.
And by 8, you sit down with a cup of coffee for absolute, unbroken, deep work.
Yes, it's a schedule of pure, pristine discipline. But then, almost inevitably, your actual unpredictable human reality just steps in.
It always does.
Right. A sudden wave of fatigue hits you out of nowhere. Or, you remember a painfully awkward conversation from 5 years ago.
Yeah, or you get a random emotionally charged text message.
Totally. And suddenly, this beautifully structured day is completely derailed by the chaotic, unedited stream of your own mind.
Well, it's because we constantly set up these idealized, disciplined versions of ourselves, right? And they are perpetually at war with the actual lived experience of being human.
Oh, completely.
We crave order and ritual, but we are fundamentally composed of interruptions.
And that exact collision between strict, sacred order and messy, secular reality is mapped out perfectly in the analytical notes we're doing a deep dive into today.
Yeah, this is a fascinating set of sources.
It really is. They deconstruct this massive musical composition by Dr. David Peterson, and it's called Call and Response.
And massive is the right word. This is a sprawling psychological architecture. I mean, we're talking 16 movements.
486 measures long.
Exactly. And Peterson uses this piece to physically manifest that battle inside your head. He pits two completely different musical worlds against each other.
Right. On one side, you have this traditional sacred liturgical choir, and on the other, a modern, totally unpredictable jazz quintet.
And the genius of the piece is that these two ensembles, they don't take turns.
No, they don't politely share the stage at all.
Right. They actively shadow each other across a relentless 24-hour cycle.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can grasp how these two musical worlds clash, we really need to understand the mechanics of who the players are.
And why they occupy the exact same space.
Exactly. So how is this actually structured?
Well, the literal framework of the composition is built around the 8 canonical hours.
Which historically are the designated times of day when monastic communities gather to pray, right?
Yeah, and that structure is unyielding. It happens every single day. So in Peterson's piece, each of these 8 hours features a liturgical call, which is then immediately answered by a jazz response.
And the instrumentation choices for these two forces, they are fiercely divided.
Oh, completely incompatible.
Right. For the liturgical call, Peterson uses this incredibly grounded historical ensemble. It's anchored by an organ, a flute, human voices, and strings.
Instruments that breathe and sustain.
Exactly. They create this feeling of endless, unbroken continuity. But then the jazz response uses a totally different sonic palette.
Yeah, an oboe, a soprano sax, a bassoon, a piano, and a cello.
Peterson is essentially arming his two sides with incompatible vocabularies.
And the origin story of the work explains that divide perfectly. Peterson actually originally wrote these as 2 entirely separate compositions.
Wait, really? They weren't meant to go together?
Not originally, no. One was titled On the Canonical Hours, which was structurally rigid, focused on discipline and reverence.
Okay.
And the other was a highly personal, almost cynical piece called Prayers of a Flapper.
Wow. That title alone implies an entirely different worldview.
Totally.
Because a flapper represents, the roaring 20s, urban nightlife, indulgence.
The total rejection of traditional morality.
Right.
But Peterson realized these 2 isolated works actually belong together, like they were 2 halves of a single psyche.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, he described them in his notes as persona and shadow, or the king and his jester.
The disciplined, ascetic king and the worldly, irrepressible jester.
Exactly. But here's the thing, when he combined them, he completely refused to let them merge into a smooth, third stream jazz classical fusion.
Right, they don't blend.
No, they speak entirely past each other because they inhabit 2 fundamentally different civilizations of time.
Yeah, the notes mention this concept of vertical versus horizontal time, which I think requires a bit of unpacking for us.
It's a crucial distinction.
So if the canonical hours represent vertical time, that means time is cyclical, it's ritualized, and it's symbolic.
Right. It's about a collective group trying to align themselves with an eternal, unchanging higher power.
Whereas the jazz quintet, which represents horizontal time, is experiencing life in a straight chronological line.
It's lived hour by lived hour.
Yeah, it's bodily, it's psychological, it's urban, and it's heavily improvisatory.
So vertical time seeks to transcend the present moment, while horizontal time is just trapped entirely within it.
I think of it like having 2 entirely different operating systems trying to manage the exact same 24 hours on your phone.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Like one operating system is your rigid, perfectly color-coded calendar app that pings you every hour with a designated unchangeable task. And the other operating system is just an unedited, chaotic stream of late-night text messages from a highly dramatic friend.
Yes, and they technically exist on the exact same hardware.
But they possess zero capacity to communicate with one another.
Exactly. And following those two incompatible operating systems as the sun rises, well, that's what reveals the psychological depth of the composition.
Because we get to track them through a full day to see the exact friction point where they fail to synchronize.
Right. And the cycle begins in the deepest, most isolating part of the night, 2 in the morning, the hour of matins.
And the liturgical call here is a C major vigil.
Yeah. And musically, a C major chord with no sharps or flats, I mean, that is the most foundational, rooted space you can occupy on a piano.
It's totally grounded.
Completely. The movement is stepwise and it's slow. The voices and the organ create this intense sensation of spiritual vigilance.
Like a collective waiting in the dark.
Expectant and secure.
But then the jazz response at 2 in the morning just completely shatters that security.
Oh, it really does.
Because it features just an isolated oboe and a piano, and Peterson gives them no key signature at all.
Which is such a specific choice. Removing the key signature entirely removes the tonal center of gravity.
It has nothing to anchor it.
Right. The music wanders aimlessly. It can't resolve because it literally doesn't know where home is.
Wow.
So if the liturgical call is spiritual vigilance, the jazz response is urban insomnia.
It mimics the cadence of a whispered, anxious conversation in a dark apartment, right?
Yeah.
Like when you cannot sleep and your mind is just spinning.
Exactly. And the psychological contrast there is immediately visceral. But the friction shifts pretty dramatically as we approach Lauds, which is at 5 in the morning.
Yeah, the notes highlight this as the moment of greatest phase alignment in the entire piece.
Because dawn provides this unique psychological threshold.
Right, the liturgical side maintains its steady, undemonstrative pre-dawn praise.
But the jazz response changes its character entirely. It doubles its reed presence and introduces the cello.
So the tonal quality becomes richer, thicker, and earthier.
Yeah, you have this vivid, almost cinematic intersection. The devout are waking up in the dark cold to pray.
And the flapper, the secular worldly mind, is just getting home from a long, chaotic night out.
Exactly. So for a fraction of a second, the waking ascetic and the exhausted reveler are breathing the exact same early morning air.
It's a fleeting truce.
Yes.
It's the one moment in the 24-hour cycle where the quiet of the dawn belongs equally to sacred ritual and private, secular consciousness.
But that fragile harmony makes the absolute desolation of noon hit so much harder.
Oh, definitely. By the time we reach the hour of sext, the atmosphere has completely deteriorated.
Yeah. Sext is the longest movement in the work.
It stretches across 54 measures.
And it serves as the emotional hinge of the whole composition.
Because noon carries an immense theological burden in the monastic tradition, right? It's the hour of the crucifixion.
Exactly. It's historically associated with midday heat, extreme fatigue, and vulnerability.
And Peterson translates this theological weight into just a brilliant mechanical choice.
It's so striking.
Throughout this massive movement, neither the liturgical call nor the jazz response contains a single dynamic marking.
Which is crazy. The psychological effect of that must be incredibly disorienting for the performers and the audience.
Yeah, I mean, a musician relies on dynamic markings, instructions to play louder, softer, to crescendo or decrescendo. That's how you convey emotion.
Right.
Stripping all of that away forces this flat, emotionally bleached performance. It creates a sort of liturgical white space.
It essentially forces the listener to confront the sheer endurance of the midday sun without any emotional guidance from the composer.
But there is a structural pattern happening here with the choir that seems to carry a heavy implication.
Yeah, what did you notice there?
Well, at the 2 in the morning matins hour, the liturgy features a full choir of human voices.
Right.
But by the time we hit Tirth at 9 in the morning, the voices drop out entirely. And by none at 3 in the afternoon, the liturgy has become purely instrumental.
That's right.
So if noon represents the crucifixion, is Peterson suggesting that this strict, unyielding theology eventually alienates the human element completely? Like, as the jazz ensemble gets richer, the monastery is literally losing its humanity.
What's fascinating here is how Peterson mirrors that exact loss of humanity in the musical mechanics of the jazz quintet.
Oh, how so?
You are absolutely right that the liturgical calls systematically grow more austere and impersonal, but the jazz responses do not just get richer.
What do?
They systematically grow more angular and volatile. Peterson achieves this by forcing the jazz instruments to take wider and wider intervallic leaps.
Meaning the leaps between the notes become physically and sonically massive.
Exactly. A melody with small intervallic leaps feels conversational and predictable to the human ear.
Right, you can sort of anticipate where the musical phrase is going next.
Exactly. But by stretching the intervals across these massive jagged dissonances, Peterson prevents the brain from predicting the melody.
So the music becomes harmonically restless.
Yes, it induces a subtle state of anxiety. The secular response grows frantic and volatile precisely as the sacred call shrinks into this silent asceticism.
You'd naturally anticipate this crossing progression to just drift inevitably toward the evening. Right?
Sure, like a fade out.
Yeah, the church gets quieter, the jazz gets more chaotic, and the sun sets. But the score hides two deliberate psychological ambushes that aggressively shattered the timeline.
And the first ambush arrives at terce, which is the 9 in the morning hour.
Right. The liturgical call for terce is a gentle mid-morning prayer. It's scored for flute and strings, cruising along at a very comfortable 80 beats per minute.
It feels sunny and devout.
Exactly. But the jazz response obliterates that piece instantly.
It really does.
It features a blazing soprano saxophone and a piano roaring in at 140 beats per minute.
It's the fastest, most aggressive movement in the work.
Why does it jump like that?
The sudden acceleration in tempo physically jolts the listener. It represents the brutal, unceremonious intrusion of the working day. All the spiritual clarity cultivated during the early morning hours is violently hijacked by the frantic economic demands of the secular world.
That makes so much sense. But here's where it gets really interesting. The second ambush is even more severe, and it occurs at Compline.
The final canonical hour of the day at 8 in the evening.
Right. The monastic community is preparing for sleep. So the liturgical call is marked pianissimo, the absolute quietest dynamic in the entire score.
It's a posture of total surrender.
But then the jazz quintet responds with a fortissimo explosion. It's the loudest section of the piece, defined by these massive 8.2 semitone leaps.
The listener is braced for a lullaby and is instead hit with an absolute wall of chaotic sound.
Yeah, and on paper, the sheer volume and chaos of the jazz quintet feels like an intentional mockery of liturgy.
Right, like it's being disrespectful.
Exactly. But the analytical notes reframe this entirely as a temporal mismatch.
Which is such a crucial distinction.
Think about a night shift nurse returning home to cook a heavy aromatic dinner and listen to a podcast right as their spouse is waking up, pouring coffee, and trying to enjoy the silent stillness of the morning.
Yes, exactly.
The nurse isn't maliciously trying to ruin the morning peace. Their biological and psychological clock is simply existing in a completely different reality.
The gesture is not intentionally mocking the king's retirement.
Right.
The canonical hours are desperately trying to achieve closure. They want to organize time into a neat conclusion so the mind can surrender to sleep.
But the jazz quintet, representing urban modernity and private longing, does not view 8 in the evening as the end of the day.
Not at all. For the secular mind, the setting of the sun triggers an intensified interiority. The city mind sharpens into hyper-wakefulness at the exact moment the monastery demands oblivion.
And that severe temporal mismatch at Compline pushes the composition to its breaking point.
It has to break.
The strict boundaries that have kept these two musical worlds isolated from each other finally collapse.
Yeah, the critical turning point of the piece is what happens when ritual and lived reality can no longer ignore one another.
The styles infect each other.
Yes, the permeability becomes absolute, and that neat call and response format devolves into a recursive feedback loop.
The mechanics of this breakdown are incredibly unsettling.
Deeply.
Because the sacred music, which has maintained its stable vertical discipline all day long, suddenly becomes deeply anxious.
It becomes repetitive, constrained, and narrow.
The ritual completely fails to hold back the approaching anxiety of the night.
And the jazz side suffers a parallel breakdown.
Right.
The quintet loses the improvisatory freedom that defined its earlier movements.
Because jazz requires forward momentum, right? It
Yeah.
needs spontaneous variation to breathe.
Exactly. But here it gets trapped in tight, looping ostinatos. It devolves into a nervous second.
Like an accumulative insistence with zero sense of harmonic release.
The piece denies the listener any easy, transcendent resolution where everything just harmonizes into a peaceful night prayer.
But it also avoids the cliche of crashing into pure nihilistic noise.
Right. The notes describe the final measures as evoking sleepless cognition after ritual has failed to quiet the mind.
The music simply continues thinking.
It perfectly replicates the psychological state of rumination. It is the sound of the mind spinning its wheels in the dark when the prayers have offered no comfort and the exhaustion provides no sleep.
So what does this all mean? Like, why should you, sitting here right now, care about the structural mechanics of an obscure clash between a choir and a saxophonist?
Well, it hits closer to home than people realize.
It really does. You should care because that flapper, that chaotic jazz quintet, is the human remainder.
Yes.
It represents the sensuality, the fatigue, the irony, the appetite, and the profound loneliness that our strict schedules and daily rituals simply cannot absorb.
Because you can optimize your morning routine and color code your calendar down to the absolute minute, but you cannot schedule away your fundamental humanity. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Peterson's work exposes the tragedy and the necessity of our dual nature.
Right. We desperately need order, represented by the liturgy, as a genuine attempt to shape our consciousness and defend ourselves against chaos.
But that chaotic lived experience, represented by the jazz, contains our vitality.
Exactly. Both the king and the jester are necessary for human survival, but neither is sufficient on its own.
Man, we tracked an incredible psychological arc today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did. We observed the rigid separation of the canonical hours and the worldly flapper.
We witnessed their fleeting pre-dawn truce at Lauds.
And we endured the emotionally bleached, silent heat of noon at Sext,
Before finally colliding with the massive temporal mismatch of Compline.
where the boundaries of the mind just dissolve into anxious, recursive feedback.
It forces us to confront the reality that human consciousness cannot be entirely governed or subdued by ritual.
No matter how hard we try.
Right. Something always remains awake in the dark.
And Peterson's composition assumes a world where both the sacred king and the secular jester are fighting for control of the psyche.
But looking at the modern, hyper-connected way we live today, it raises a terrifying question. Have we culturally eradicated the king entirely?
That is the big question.
Have we dismantled vertical time and sacred rituals so thoroughly that we are now just the jester, trapped in an endless stream of horizontal time, spinning our wheels in the dark with nothing left to answer our calls?
It's this fascinating space where two completely, utterly clashing musical worlds collide. To really understand the hook of this piece, you have to picture the stark contrast driving the whole thing. On one hand, we have this solemn, ancient, heavily structured tradition of the canonical hours. You know, the monastic system of marking the day through deep, rhythmic prayer. And then, right up against it, we have this cheekier, far more personal counterpart called prayers of a flapper. This side represents the modern, messy, improvisationary experience of an urban jazz quintet. So we're talking about two entirely different civilizations of time, basically, trying to speak across a massive divide.
Dr. Peterson actually gave us this fantastic quote that frames our entire journey today. He described the dynamic as being almost like persona and shadow, or the king and his jester. It perfectly explains how these two wildly separate ideas actually merge into one cohesive piece. The liturgical sections, the sacred parts, they don't just happen before the jazz responses, they actually seem to generate them psychologically. As Peterson notes, sure, they talk past each other, but one is the persona and the other is the shadow. They simply have to coexist because, well, that's how it's always been in actual human experience. All right, moving into part one, the king and his jester. Let's quickly establish the ground rules for these two very distinct ensembles. So here's the core duality we're working with. The sacred ensemble, which is anchored by the organ, flute, voices, and strings, lives in what we can think of as vertical time. It's cyclical, it's highly ritualized, symbolic, and deeply communal. But then in total contrast, we have our secular jazz quintet. They're playing instruments of individual expression, saxophone, bassoon, piano, cello, oboe, and their experience of time, it is strictly horizontal. They are living hour by lived hour in the gritty, bodily, psychological reality of the modern city. Let's move on to part two, the arc of a day. We're going to actually track how these two worlds interact as we travel chronologically through the composer's 8 canonical hours. We are navigating a massive 16-movement, 486-measure piece here. Our journey starts in the deep, dark dead of night at 2 a.m. with matins. Then we push through the dawn at Lauds, hit the bright mid-morning of Terce, and eventually wind our way all the way back into the evening with Vespers and Compline. And as the clock ticks forward, the tension between our sacred call and our secular response fiercely, and I mean fiercely, evolves. In these early hours, the dynamic gets set immediately. Imagine it's 2 a.m. The sacred vigil is perfectly still, attentive, expectant. But how is it answered? By wandering, totally sleepless jazz. You've got a piano and an oboe making these wide, angular leaps that practically scream urban insomnia. But then, at 5 a.m. for lauds, something truly magical happens. The spiritual and secular actually briefly breathe the exact same pre-dawn air. The devout are already awake praying, while the city dweller, the flapper, is probably just getting home for the night. They pass each other in the dark, occupying the exact same threshold, and the music reflects that beautifully with a much richer, warmer, earthier jazz response. But don't get too comfortable, because the dynamic shifts dramatically at 9 a.m. for terce. The contemplative liturgical call sets up the absolute most jarring surprise in the entire piece. The organ and voices drop out entirely. They go completely silent. Instead, we get this bright, energetic, worshipful call using strictly flute and violins. It's the loudest, most extroverted sacred section so far, and it perfectly sets the trap for what happens next. Out of nowhere, the jazz response just explodes. We are suddenly blazing at 140 beats per minute. A soprano saxophone absolutely tears over a piano in what is by far the fastest movement in the entire work. It perfectly captures that frantic, chaotic working day sprint, violently interrupting a quiet morning prayer. The contrast is almost comic, honestly. It's this massive musical whiplash that says, ready or not, the relentless working day has arrived. Which brings us to part 3, the silent midday. We've reached the emotional hinge of the work, where the heat and the heavy burden of high noon totally take over. Get this, for sex at noon, which is the hour of the crucifixion in monastic tradition, neither the liturgical call nor the bassoon piano jazz response has a single dynamic marking written in the score. 0. No fortes, no pianos. Nothing. It just sits in this unmarked, neutral stillness. And let me tell you, this absolute lack of direction creates an overwhelming feeling of being completely exposed and utterly, bone-tiringly exhausted. To put that exhaustion into perspective, this movement is 54 measures long. It's the longest movement of the whole work, yet it sits in utter, heavy silence. It creates this burdened liturgical white space. The bassoon and piano share this unusual blankness, and despite being incredibly expansive and unhurried, it says the absolute least in terms of articulated expression. It makes the whole thing feel unbelievably tense. All right, moving to part 4, the final collision. Evening is setting in, and these ensembles stop just talking past each other and begin to actively, psychologically contaminate one another. So, how does this infection work? Well, it turns into this recursive feedback loop. First, the sacred music loses that luminous quality it had earlier. It becomes rigid, narrow, and super anxious. Second, the jazz quintet entirely loses its improvisatory freedom. It gets trapped in these looping, compulsive, nervous little figures. And finally, the realization hits. The ritual is failing to quiet the mind. These frantic, panicked responses start retroactively changing the very meaning of the sacred calls themselves. And this all boils over at Compline, 8 p.m., the final collision. The monks are getting ready for bed with a hushed, tender resolution for sleep. It's literally the quietest prayer in the entire score. But the quintet, they are just waking up for the night. They deliver their loudest, most angular outburst yet, hitting a fortissimo and taking these massive, erratic leaps, averaging around 8.2 semitones. It creates this incredibly jarring, dissonant chaos. It's the perfect sound of a mind intensely trapped in its own panicked motion. I absolutely love this imagery from the composer's own notes. He says the jester doesn't intend to interrupt the king's retirement. He simply hasn't noticed the candles being snuffed. It perfectly captures how these two entities are living in completely different versions of the exact same evening. The jazz outburst isn't trying to be irreverent or mocking, it's just a profound temporal mismatch. Night isn't the end of the psychic day for the city, it's the beginning of it. The monastery is preparing for oblivion while the city mind is just sharpening up. Which brings us to part 5, a shared human nature. And here is the absolutely crucial point you need to take away. This piece does not try to neatly solve the tension between the sacred and the secular. What it shows us is that both the structured ritual of the canonical hours and the messy lived experience of the jazz quintet are completely necessary. But neither of them alone is sufficient. The liturgy is this genuine, beautiful attempt to shape human consciousness and hold back the chaos.
But the jazz, the flopper, that's the human remainder that liturgy simply cannot absorb. It is the sensuality, the fatigue, the profound loneliness, the irony, and just the inescapable wakefulness of being human. So the ending offers this profound, almost tragic intelligence. It doesn't tie everything up with a neat little bow. It leaves the music and us in a state of unresolved thought. It absolutely doesn't deny the value of ritual, but it does show ritual reaching its ultimate limit. It avoids easy transcendence, and it completely avoids fashionable nihilism. The music isn't redeemed and it isn't destroyed. It is simply, intensely still thinking. Which leaves us with this heavy, lingering question about the limits of structure and the reality of our own minds. Because, sure, the canonical hours can organize time beautifully, but they cannot entirely govern our consciousness. Think about it. When the candles are snuffed out and the rituals of your day finally come to an end, what remains awake in you? Thank you so much for exploring this brilliant architecture with me today. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you on the next explainer.